if it truly is your intention to quit, what are the actions that you believe that you're willing to take today that will eventually enable you to get towards that goal, right? In terms of whether you need to, if you feel like you want to have something lined up before you quit, what are the steps you're going to take to do that in terms of the networking that you're going to do, the jobs you're going to look at, the conversations that you're going to have, things like that. Or if you're going to quit and not have anything lined up, the things you need to do to kind of keep track of your finances or your personal life, the conversations you need to have with your spouse, your partner, the rest of your family, things like that. Anything you can do to start really getting clear around how you link the intention with the actions. And then finally, follow through on them.
Welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast, where we help you escape your toxic workplace, build career confidence, and find the role that's right for you. My name is Martin McGovern, founder and lead coach at Career Therapy, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Please welcome Al D to the podcast. Al is an author, podcast host, advisor, product marketer, and the founder of Betterwork Labs. He is passionate about helping people and organizations navigate transformation, and today we talk about the evolving relationship between employees and employers, the new priorities that people are looking for in their work, and what you can do to quit your job in 2022, if that's what you want to do. Thank you for tuning in and supporting the show. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes so that the algorithm can share these conversations with more job seekers like you. And now sit back, relax, and listen in to my conversation with Al. Today's episode is brought to you by HIRECT.us, a free app that lets hiring teams and candidates instantly chat about incredible job opportunities. If you're a hiring manager, CEO, or recruiter, download the HIRECT app to see a curated list of talented individuals and accelerate your hiring process 10 times faster than traditional ways. And if you're a job seeker, join the platform to start talking to decision makers at startups who are ready to hire. Businesses grow faster when everyone is communicating seamlessly. Download HIRECT.us, that's HIRECT.us today. So Al, when it comes to the job search, and you and I are both coaches, we're on the Muse, we're doing our thing. You kind of mentioned in our chats prior that this is about the time as we get to the end of January that resolutions start to slip. And so what are some of the resolutions that you've been hearing from job seekers and people you've been working with? And how is it going for people? There's always the cliches, but I'm curious what you've been seeing.
Yeah. And well, first off, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. It's great to chat with you. I always love chatting with other career coaches and talking shop, but I promise we'll make this entertaining for the folks at home as well. And when it comes to resolutions, you're right. It's almost the end of the month. I think a lot of people go into the new year, new me, new intentions around either things they want to do in their career or moves they want to make or goals that they have for themselves. But human nature sometimes takes over, right? In terms of, I think we all have the best of intentions, but when it actually comes down to doing things and the execution, there's a lot of reasons why that potentially can maybe go off the rails. Maybe we, particularly with related to career goals, maybe perhaps we get buried in work, right? I think we're all dealing with different forms of challenges at work. One of them could be overwork, particularly if your fellow employees are leaving. Sometimes, it goes without saying, but this month in general there's been continued to be a lot of challenges outside of work, right? In terms of if you have children and you're dealing with challenges with childcare, or if you're just dealing with other situations, those things can derail a lot of intentions and goals. And I think the bigger thing and the more strategic thing I think that's happening is kind of the acknowledgement, at least for my clients, to say, all right, I know I maybe didn't get off on the right foot of where I wanted to be. So two things. One, how do I reset and be intentional about the direction I want to go in? And then number two, what are some of those actions that I can take now that I have an idea of where I want to go that I know will get me toward the direction that I want to move in? And I think that's been kind of the nature of the conversation. And whether that is, I'm going to commit to identifying a couple paths that I will start evaluating and having informational interviews on, because I know that this path I'm on right now is not what I want. Or whether it's I am going to finally update my resume and my LinkedIn and start actually talking to folks in my network who I know have these roles that I'm interested in, and I'm going to commit to doing that. It's once we identify and can kind of have a conversation around, hey, this is not where I want to be, but I have an idea of where I do want to go. The next question is, okay, well, what are some behaviors that we can drive, some actions that we can take that can help us get towards that better state of where we are, and then giving us some grace for the fact that, you know what, it's okay that we didn't achieve the goal that we set for ourselves in the beginning. That happens. That's life. And sometimes the opportunities that come from when things maybe don't go how that are planned often end up either exactly where we want to be or in a better direction than we could have ever had imagined. So there's a certain, I think, amount of just letting go of, yeah, that happened. I didn't get off the way I wanted to, but now I have a chance to do something different, and that's great. Yeah. That's the beauty. Yeah, it's the beauty of life.
Yeah, it's funny because whenever I talk to people about goal setting, and I do this myself as well, the trap we get into is we set goals from an idealistic place, from an optimistic place, from a if everything worked out perfectly kind of way, here's what my goals would look like. I even have on my board over here a bunch of here's my ideal schedule for the day. Yeah, I'm never ever gonna live, maybe a few times, maybe once a week I'll live that schedule perfectly, but most of the time it's gonna go off the rails, and most of the time I'm not gonna achieve it. And I like that you threw out the idea of giving ourselves some grace there, because number one, we're not good at, as humans, we're not good at setting goals. We set goals that are too large. We set too many goals at the same time. We set goals without really understanding what the process is to achieve them. We do all sorts of different things. And then we beat ourselves up for not achieving the things that were unrealistic to begin with, that we didn't quite realize, right? And so
Sure.
That sort of self-forgiveness, I think, is really important to kind of really point out, because some people, when they set their resolutions and don't achieve them, it's almost like you're hurting yourself twice. You didn't achieve the resolution and you're beating yourself up. Maybe you're hurting yourself 3 times because now you're even less inclined to set a goal again, right? Because you didn't achieve it.
And the thing that sorry to interrupt. One of the things that you said there, which I love, is, and particularly with respect to job searches, is this idea of process, not just outcomes. I mean, an outcome certainly is important. A goal we're working towards is important, but the process, I think, is just as important, right? And I think you and I both know, or if you put us in a room together, we could probably map out the types of things in a job search process that we know if people do these things will eventually lead to a desired outcome. But sometimes those are easy to forget about because we fixate so much on the outcome or goal. And in most cases, the goal is the job offer or that desired job offer. That's important. But what's really important are the steps in the process that if we focus on those and do those right, they will eventually lead, to that outcome, right? The networking that we do, the making sure that we prepare for an interview, that we're asking questions at the end of the interview, that we're following up. Those are all steps in the process that we know that if we do those repeatedly, do those right, the outcome will eventually come. And that's also why whenever I talk to clients, anything around goals and outcomes, I always really try to also help remind them of, hey, let's also think about the process and making sure we have a good process. And to your point, it's okay sometimes if you have your ideal day and those elements of that day, just like a process, don't all go to plan. All that really means is that tomorrow you can try again and see if you can get a couple more of those things right. And so just, it is a little bit of having grace, but it's also just a little bit of, I think, maybe flipping the switch in our mind to just accept the fact that we're never always going to be perfect. But if we have an idea and a sketch of what we think will lead to the outcome that we want, let's just try to chip away at that. And whether that's a job search or what your ideal day is, I think it applies in a very similar manner.
Yeah, and that's key, because I think a lot of people have an all or nothing mindset, right? I'm going to do everything perfectly, or it's not even worth trying. And you can get pretty far on 60%. You can get pretty far in life.
Sure. Well, I mean, even your day is an example, right? It's like, it's not as if I'm going to ask a rhetorical question here, but let's say there's 10 things on your list of things that make an ideal day. Would you still have a great day if you did 8 of those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think
I answered your rhetorical, but yeah,
yeah,
100%. But this kind of brings up the biggest goal that I think a lot of people have been trying to set for themselves in the new year, which is, should I quit? Should I quit my job this year? It is 2022. We're in the midst of this great resignation that everyone's talking about. We are in the hybrid, remote, continuing COVID, moving out of big cities, learning how to, have some sort of odd hybrid entrepreneurial contract career. Everything's all happening all at once, right? And in our last episode, I was actually chatting with someone who runs a site called Overemployed, and he's saying, you should work 2 jobs at the same time, remote, and double your income. And so I'm always curious, when people are talking to you about wanting to quit, let's start with the motivations behind it. What are the motivations driving people's want to quit their jobs that you're seeing in the workplace right now?
Yeah, where do we start? Toxic work environment, overwork, challenging boss, challenging employees, lack of motivation to do the job, feeling symptoms of burnout, challenges in home life and personal life, things like that. I mean, the list kind of goes on. I mean, I think it's hard to kind of say this without being trite, but really the past 2 years have just been really challenging for all of us, and we've all been experiencing it in different ways, but it's all been there for all of us. And so there's a multitude of different reasons. But getting back to how you kind of frame this, I think lately, at this point, we've been talking about the Great Resignation, and we've seen the statistics on the quit rates for a good, almost, over a year now. And so at this point, it's not a sideshow. It's front and center. It's something that every month that goes by, I think it just becomes more and more of a thing. And I think that, and we were going back and forth over this on email before, what I've started to see now is with folks who have continued on this path for the past 2 years, a lot of them are starting to wonder, okay, I've navigated through the first wave, I've navigated through the first year, I've navigated now through the second year. I'm tired, or I think it's time to move on. But is it, what do I do now? Or how do I do this? Or they're in a situation where, unfortunately, so many people that they work with on their team or in their organization have left, and they're left with all the work, and it becomes unsustainable for them. And so that's another thing that often comes up. I mean, I think, and maybe this is where I would love to kind of get your thoughts on this too. I don't think I never think that career decisions are panaceas. There's one magic elixir in these kinds of situations. It's always a continuum, and there's always considerations that everyone's going to have their own set that are going to be important to them for making a big decision like this. But what I do think I've been hopeful for is, at least in the conversations I've had particularly with the clients this week, it's people who are taking this as a chance to pause and just to say, things are not going in the direction that I want them to go in. And I would like to figure out if that means that I need to quit, need a new role, whether that's here or in another company, or if I just need a break. And I think that anytime you can catch yourself to have a moment to think more deeply about a solution before you jump into action, I think the odds increase that, at least from my experience, that whatever you end up deciding ends up being something that's more aligned with what you actually want, versus a reaction to the headlines that you're seeing, or the fact that you're getting all these emails in your inbox of people announcing that they're leaving, or looking on LinkedIn and seeing people starting new jobs and wondering, oh, should I be doing that too?
Yeah, I think your point there about it not being a magic cure-all and elixir, I think that's so important. I actually see this in both directions. I see people who are unemployed saying, all I need is a job. Once I have a job, all my problems are fixed. And I go, no, you just trade job search problems for having a job problems. And if you talk to anyone who has a job, they all have something to complain about, right? So sure, it's nicer to have the income and the security and the things like that, but then you have the bad boss, or you have the awkward situation, or you have to the long commute, whatever the thing is, right? And so it's like, the grass is always greener, right? And when we think about quitting as this sort of cure-all, it's like, well, all I need to do is just get out of here. And I've had that before. I quit a job without a backup, but there was a lot of stuff that I had to consider before making that move, and, getting finances in order, knowing what my like worst case scenarios were. And even just like knowing what age I was, like I was at a point where moving back home with parents wasn't a big deal.
Right.
Whereas now that's a big deal. Like, I wouldn't want to do that. Right. So like you have to kind of consider so many factors: family, money, everything like that. I'm curious, when you're talking to someone who is like, I don't have another job set up, I just need to get out of here. What are the things that you encourage them to get in line or line up or work on, or like what sort of fortifications do they need to put up in order to be able to make this jump? Or should they just wait till they have another job and try and do the job search on top of? Obviously there's no like one specific answer, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are a couple things to think about, and I think I think there's a couple baseline things just in terms of your own personal situation, right? And to the point that you made, in the example that you made, in your case, you were at a point where if you quit a job, in terms of actually being able to live each and every day, you had a good had some support system in place in terms of you could move home, be with your family. That certainly, I assume, saves saves some expenses. Obviously, we need to first and foremost be able to take care of ourselves and in some cases take care of our families. And so I think that is always a consideration of just pure survival, right? In terms of, I'm at a point in my life where I have the ability to potentially forego income for a period of time. And that's always a big challenge, a big hurdle, right, to think through, particularly if you are someone who is in a position where you're thinking about someone more than just yourself. I had an experience similar, and I was fortunate in your case, like just like you, where it was just me, just like thinking for myself. And so that definitely has different implications than if you have a partner or if you have children. So I think that's always something. I think another thing is just being able, to your point, just because you like, if you don't have the right intention, you are just trading different problems, right? And so just having the thought about, okay, if I'm going to actually leave without a job lined up, what am I going to, what is my intention for using this time? If it really is to, if you're very clear that you're using some of that time because you've been overworked and you just need time to breathe and to rest and to get better and for your own personal health, and that's your goal, then I think that can definitely make a lot of sense, and that can be really useful. But I also think that if you're not very clear about what you want to be able to get out of the time away when you're not, because you work 8 or 9 hours a day, if you're not working anymore, you're going to have a lot of time. And so just being very clear about and considerations about, okay, well, what is that time going to go towards? And I'm not suggesting that you need to be productive or anything like that. It's just more around being intentional about, there is this huge chunk of your day that you were devoting to something that you're not going to be devoting to. And so what is that going to go towards? And I think that's something to keep in mind. I think another thing to keep in mind is just around how much you want to work right now, to your point that you made. If you are someone who you want to quit because, or you want to leave without a job lined up, and you're looking for a new way of work, I think that's a very different conversation than perhaps quitting a job without anything lined up because you don't want to work anymore. And I think that leaves an interesting conversation. We can certainly go down that discussion just around contract work or freelancing or starting to work on a hobby or anything like that. But that would be another consideration to kind of think about in terms of the way of work that you want to kind of take on. And I think this, as someone who has done like some freelancing work in the past and all those types of things, I think there's a lot of different creative ways you can actually do that. But you can also choose to kind of make the jump itself. And then I would say the last thing is that I would also just think about not fully ironing out what your story is, because I don't think you need to have a huge one, but just being intentional and thinking about, okay, if I'm going to leave without anything lined up and we're going to be interviewing in a couple months down the road, what do I want to make sure that I talk about, when I have those conversations, right? And if and I don't think you have to have it all mapped out, but just keeping in mind that unfortunately, we're not at a point yet where, I think at least in the United States, where people are very comfortable, all people and all recruiters are very comfortable with gaps, right? But that's just a reality that we're in. And so you can't solve all that today, but just being a little bit of thoughtful around, okay, well, if I know I'm leaving without anything lined up, if I know I'm going to be spending my time for these reasons, just being a little thoughtful around, what am I going to talk about when I start to have these conversations again, when I am ready to go resume. And then finally, the last thing I would say is, if you, I listen, like, I think whether or not someone should leave their job without anything lined up, I think that's a personal decision. And I think a lot of it does kind of come based off of your own personal situation. And I would never, I think everyone's got their own kind of risk profile, right? And I think that's really important to consider. I would never want someone to stay in a toxic work situation anything longer than they ever should have to. But I also recognize that not everyone has the luxury of always being able to make that call. So I think it really is going to be dependent. But what I will say is this: I have seen people, and I've had clients who have quit without anything lined up, and they have been able to land opportunities. And I've also seen people who have a little bit less of a risk profile try to tough it out, and then find a way to negotiate with their new employer of being able to get the time off just to be able to recharge. And I think that is definitely something I've seen more of over the past year and a half. And I think more people are okay with that, because we've all been through hell. And I think any good hiring manager, any good recruiter is going to recognize that. It's a long-winded answer, but
no, I love it.
You
touched on a lot of really interesting things that I want to dig into. One in particular is that, like, I like how you said, go to the employer, see if you can get some time off. Sabbaticals are becoming more and more common in conversations that I'm hearing. And, I think everyone is trying to do their best to cope, especially because if you started working remote in the last 2 years, you're probably learning the harsh lesson that working remote is even harder, and maybe not harder, but it tends to lead to more hours worked in a typical week based on the stats. And so one of the things that I think is so interesting, I was chatting with a client recently who is doing multiple jobs at the same time while doing the job search. And, there's the cliche. Tough. Yeah. And there's the cliche that the job search is a full-time job, which,
of course,
I'm sorry, but if you're spending 8-9 hours a day job searching for every day of the week for 6 straight months or 4 straight months, you're probably going to go crazy. But there's something in there where I was talking to this person. I was like, all right, they had the complaint. They said, I just feel like there's not enough hours in the day. And I go, all right, well, let's break down the current hours in your day and how they're being spent. And we went through it all. And one of the things that came up was this idea that, like, sorry, we got the sirens going. I don't know if that's coming through the microphone, but it's distracting me. But so we were talking through things, and they were talking about the problems that were going on at work and how so much was getting put on their shoulders. And, they were worried about not doing everything perfect. And they were kind of going on and on about it. And I go, but they also mentioned that, there's not really any risk of getting fired. There's not really any, like, they're not worried about their job, like losing their job. They just are spending an incredible amount of hours trying to make sure that they don't ever mess anything up at their job, because they got called out on like a couple minor errors. And I was like, how perfect do you need to be? And they're like, well, I feel like everyone else at the company is such a shit show that I have to be perfect. And I was like, oh, so they get to be imperfect, right? You have to be, you have to be perfect, but they can all be imperfect. And one of the things we started talking about was just like, how much effort does your job deserve? Right?
Yeah.
How much effort does this company deserve? And most people's answer is 110%. I got to give 110%. I got to prove myself. I got to work real hard. And I'm like, at certain points in your career, sure. Like maybe at the start of your career, when you first start a job, like when you're doing certain things, sometimes you set unrealistic expectations for yourself though. And I think there's this interesting thing that tends to happen where people end up getting sort of abused by companies because the company makes them feel like they should be working every weekend. They should be working longer hours. They can't leave before any amount of time. And And I just floated the idea out to this person of like, what if you just put in like 80% of the effort and just let a
Right.
few things fall through the cracks? Like, is that okay?
Yeah.
Like how much effort do you need to put in?
Mhm.
What's the minimum
Yeah.
amount of effort you need to put in that no one would notice a change? And like that
Sure.
was like an interesting question to float out there. It's like, you kind of the narrative is that everyone should be putting in 110%, but that's why we have so much burnout. That's why we have people quitting jobs. That's why we have people like just leaving without anything else lined up, because they're spending so much time on their job that they don't have any time to plan for their future. And I actually was working with someone, and they were just like really overwhelmed at work. And they said, I'm never going to find another job because I'm just so in it here. And then they ended up quitting, and in like the 3 weeks that they had after quitting, they were like working crazy hours. And I had to remind them, I'm like, you've already quit this job.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. You don't have to be putting in 70-hour weeks when you've already quit. This isn't your responsibility anymore. And they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. And like,
Yeah.
so I'm
Yeah,
curious,
totally.
like, when it comes to like how much effort people should put into their jobs, what's your thought around it? Like, do you feel like, is this kind of a question about burnout and kind of a question about like personal responsibility versus like, what do you think like people could learn about like the baseline needs of a career? um,
Yeah.
let's start with just how much effort should you be putting into your job versus your life?
Yeah. Well, and not to have this be a continuous cop out, but I think that is the question that everyone needs to think about for themselves and decide for themselves. And I think for me, at least, one of my things that I really advocate for is that I believe all people should have the autonomy and agency to make the decisions that are best for them. And that's really what I try to advocate for when I can. And part of that is just because I know that part of why I've had a very happy and meaningful career is that because I've had those things and I've seen the benefits play out for me, and I've seen them play out for other people, and I want everyone to be able to have careers that they're happy with, however they define what that is. But getting kind of a little more granular into what you're saying, because I think it's an important point, is this notion of understanding the role that you want work to play in your life. And part of that's going to be, I think, it's going to be a little bit of a mixture of things. One, it's going to be a mixture of your own desire in terms of what makes sense to you. The second thing is going to be a mixture of the reality of the life that you live in terms of, and I keep going back to this, but it's the easiest example. If you're providing for yourself, you're providing for other people, certainly your cost of living and just living life, right? And then I think the last thing you're probably going to want to negotiate through is certainly just your own aspirations for your future. Because right now you may decide and say that I only want work to play a small role in my life. But if you also have grander aspirations of becoming a VP or an SVP or a CEO or something like that, those are not diametrically opposed, but it's just something you have to really think about. So I think everyone needs to decide that for themselves. It comes off a couple of different factors. What I have seen and what I think is really, this is really teaching us, is something over the past 2 years that I think superstar athletes have known for years and practiced for years. And so as an example, we'll take LeBron James. LeBron James arguably is one of the best basketball players to play in the NBA in the last couple decades. He's won NBA championships, MVPs, been to many All-Star games. LeBron James sleeps 10 hours a night and maybe even more in the offseason. And the reason why is because LeBron James knows that in order for him to be at his absolute best, in order for him to be the top of his game, he needs to rest. He can't be giving 100% all the time. It's not possible. And I think what I'm hopeful and what I've seen is that I think more people are recognizing, particularly just of how challenging these past 2 years have been, that we are humans and humans are not meant to work like machines, in the sense that we physically cannot be always on. And it's very hard to always be giving 110% all the time. If I were to have ask, when I do this often with my clients, where I say, realistically, like, be honest with me. Do you think you can give 100% of yourself to everything in your life for 365 days a year? And all of them always say, no, I can't. And so part of it is also giving them kind of permission to be the human that they are, and to recognize that it's just not possible to kind of do that. And so once we can kind of break from that, then we can start to have conversations around, okay, well, let's go back to the question, what role do you want work to play in your life right now? And then we can start to say, okay, if this is the role that we want it to play, what are the things that you do want to give 100% to? And then what are the things that maybe you just can't right now? And the qualifier is right now. It doesn't mean forever. It just means, like, at this point, I can only give so much to this. And maybe in the case of the client you were mentioning, it's okay for them to maybe give 80 or 70% towards a particular project, because what that means is that it frees up mental energy and physical energy to spend some of that time for them. And I think, to your point, I think that, look, employers are always going to do what's in the best interest of them. And that's why they're running a business. And I think that it would behoove employees to also understand and think about how they can also have that mindset for themselves, because their employers are already thinking about it. And so I think, and that I try when I can to give my clients the permission to kind of see it in that way. So those are kind of the considerations to kind of think about. A, what role should work play in our lives? That's a personal decision. But B, if we agree that we can't be 100% on all the time, how do we figure out how to navigate that and calibrate that based off of the role that we want work to play right now?
We interrupt today's episode to let you know about Career Therapy's Unstuck coaching program. If you're feeling paralyzed by job search procrastination and unsure of what to do next in your career, we're here to help. Each month as a member, you will get access to 2 one-on-one coaching calls, unlimited virtual chat with your coach via Slack, invitations to bi-weekly group coaching sessions, and lifetime access to our 8-part job search curriculum. Want to take your search to the next level? Head over to careertherapy.com and schedule a free 15-minute consultation to chat with me today and see if coaching is right for you. Now back to our show. Yeah, and realizing that sometimes the things that we do that aren't quote unquote work related do give us the energy to show up 100%. Well at work, right? If we're only working 24/7, we're going to be miserable, and then our work is going to suffer. So a lot of times hours do not always equal productivity, right?
Agreed.
And so one of the things that this also brings up for people is identity. If we're going to make any sort of changes to how we work, where we work, and all of the things that we're talking about here, it's going to push up against our different identities, right? So for this one person, they had a perfectionism identity, right? I'm someone who puts in 110% at work, and it's because they had a background in music. And when you're in an orchestra, if you mess up a note, everyone in the orchestra knows. And if you mess up during an audition, you just don't get into that orchestra. So then they brought that into the tech space, and I had to remind them, like, or it was actually maybe the legal space. I had to remind them, like, this is not an orchestra. It is not the same thing. So we're bringing identities from previous jobs into other jobs, where we're kind of, when we make changes, we have to change our identity with that change. And this kind of goes to your point about getting your story together and knowing, like, how you're going to tell this. Maybe you don't have the whole thing together, but like kind of thinking through what that story is. And so how have you seen identity shape people's decisions, or how have you seen people respond to a change in their working identities?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm glad you brought it up, because so much of how we respond to things, or so much of our decision making, I think, is often driven by things that are deep within us, sometimes steeped either in how we were raised or in the signals we took from culture around us, however you define culture, whether that's in your community or just at large, right? And certainly I think that to the point you just made, there typically has kind of been a longstanding kind of culture of working hard is a good thing, and working hard means working lots of hours, right? Or being successful is a good thing, and being successful means that you're achieving and not making mistakes. And whether or not that's true or perceived, if that's part of your identity, like in the example that you gave about your former client who's a musician, that's a lot to unpack and unwind. I mean, I think with anything, the first step is always being able to notice it and to name it, and then to being able to really hone in on, this is a thing that is deeply influencing me and that's ingrained in me. And then also to ask yourself, is this still serving me in the right way? And in the case of, I think your former client, in her old world, it was serving her well, or was serving her in the sense that it enabled her to get into the orchestra and to be able to play successfully. But in her new world, and I think you mentioned she worked in tech, the tech environment is a different environment where without knowing too many details of it, if it's a startup, good luck on getting anything perfect. I mean, it doesn't. And so that's one example where a long held belief, not bad on the surface, but isn't serving you in the same way because your environment has changed, the circumstances have changed, and what makes you successful in this environment arguably has also changed. And so I think the first part of it is being able to name it, and then being able to ask yourself the question, to what degree is this still serving me? Now, there's probably some nuance in there in the sense that wanting to be correct a lot is still not a bad thing in this new environment, right? It's like, it's better, in some ways. It's not like it goes to zero, but it may not be serving in the same ways. And so I think the first thing is really being able to name it and to ask and to see how it still serves you. And similarly, I think that it's been interesting. I don't know if you've been following the anti-work thread on Reddit, but there's an example where there's a lot of people in that thread. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's a thread on Reddit. A lot of people who are kind of are thinking in new ways about how they perceive work, a la anti, and are really kind of against productivity culture, hustle culture, and just this general notion of overwork. But if you kind of read through a lot of the threads there, you do get a lot of people who, to your question about identity, a lot of them talk about the fact that I was raised in this way or always thought this thing, and then I had this transformative experience, a la COVID, where I've started to really shift my thinking around all of this and to understand some of the implications of it. And now I want to move in a new way. And I think that's an example. Some of the people in there are examples of just how that identity, kind of shifts and changes. It's with anything like that. It's not easy work. I think it is can be pretty challenging and can also be pretty, I don't want to say traumatic, but it can be a lot to process because you are changing and shifting your worldviews. Yeah. But if we look at it at a macro level, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this too, humans evolve like they do. And who we are when we're young and we learn some of these things, and where we are now as we're adults and who we'll be later in our lives, that we change, our views change, that happens. And so I hope that this gives, and I try to give permission to people to update and change, because that's what people do.
Yeah, I love that I haven't seen the anti-work Reddit in detail, but I definitely want to go check it out now, because it is true that belief systems around work are changing. You just see that in the way that, boomers are talking and Gen Z are talking and Gen X or whatever the different gens are. And, there's so much out there about okay, boomer, that's how you used to do work, but here's our new world of work. Right. And, there is a lot of conversations around what will work be in the future, right? So many jobs nowadays don't actually have practical application anymore. It's a lot more focused on entertainment and distraction and things around those areas of life, especially as we dig deeper into the metaverse and people start having metaverse careers, which is going to be kind of crazy. Even what we do, career coaching is it's a unique type of job that when I started doing it was pretty fringe and now is becoming very mainstream, to the point where it's disrupting, professional training industries and things like that. And I remember when I went through my identity change, it was pretty difficult to let go of my marketer identity. I had built that up pretty strong over a 10-year period. And I was I'm doing all this coaching, but I'm not a coach. I'm a marketer. And I was like, it was a very difficult transition that I had to do. And I remember sitting down and writing in my journal one day, okay, I guess you're a coach now. You've been doing it long
Sure.
enough that you can own that identity. And it's kind of funny to look at how those things change. And I think kind of one of the biggest drivers of the great resignation right now is that belief systems around work and the role work plays and the identity that we get from work, they're changing. When I did a road trip around the country years ago, I remember seeing how different cities had different relationships to work and how people talked about things. New York was very financially based. The questions you got asked were more like prestige based, like how much do you make, where do you work, kind of things. And then when I was in Denver, it was much more lifestyle based. It was like, where do you ski in Colorado? It wasn't really what do you do. And then in Chicago, it's what do you do, like, because we're very much like, boots on the ground, just like hard work kind of culture. And then in LA and California, it was very like more so like status followership driven, fame driven. And so it was like, what's your Instagram following? Like it was the questions change depending on where you are in the country and where you are in the world. And I think those evolutions, like you put it, are what are behind this great resignation, are what are driving these. It drove hustle culture and it's driving the push against hustle culture. And I think that both are necessary in order to find the healthy medium for the individual. And when it comes down to these big shifts in beliefs, what are some of the main shifts that you're seeing in people's minds?
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I think you mentioned, I think, a couple of them. And I think one of them is this idea of what role it is, what role do I want work to play in my life? And as like a very tactical corollary of that, how much do I want to work? Right? Do I want to be always on? I think the thing that I often think about, particularly during COVID and during this conversation around remote work and distributed work and all of those things, we, particularly in the beginning when there was a lot of dialogue of return to work or going back, being able to return, one of the things I often thought about and brought up was asking the honest question: were things really perfect before, right, in the workplace? And if we're being honest, probably not. I think probably to varying degrees, people will have different things to say about that. But the work environment and challenges with things, they were real before March 2020, and they were going to be, if COVID didn't happen, they still would have been very real. I think that COVID shined a light on a lot of them, but they didn't start because of COVID. They may have gotten more challenging in certain ways, but they were all there. I lived in the Bay Area. People still were very challenged with the daily commutes and trying to kind of keep up with that and all the other things. Like all of that was there and present before this started. And so I think that this gave us a moment to really see those a lot more clearly. Well, how we choose to do with them, it's interesting just how companies are choosing to respond in different ways based off of what they want to do moving forward. But I think, to your point, I think people are starting to think much more about those things when making decisions around the types of companies they want to work at or the types of industries that they want to work in terms of thinking more deeply about the things that actually enable us to do the work, the culture, the environment, the ways of working, the beliefs around how performance is managed, what gets rewarded, those things. I think there's a shift in that in terms of how people are evaluating companies and what they want out of that. I think that's maybe a shift. And then I think the other shift, and the thing that really I think comes up more now than there ever was before. I mean, I think in the pre-COVID days, there are obviously things like Glassdoor and many other types of places out there where you could get information on a company and their culture. It's just much more tactical now, just in terms of the big elephants in the room, right? What's your return to work policy? Are you remote first, or what's your policy on remote workers? Really thinking about benefits, right? That whole conversation has really changed a lot significantly over the past 2 years in terms of what companies are offering to people. And then maybe I would say the last thing is part of what's really changing and shifting, or really how people are thinking about this. I think that more and more people, we'll see how this plays out over the years, but There was a stat, I think, that granted, like, it was put out by Upwork, so you have to kind of take it for what it's worth. But by 2027, there is going to be more freelancers than fully employed professionals. There are, to give them a little bit of grace, there are some more macro trends, I think, happening in terms of population demographic shifts, things like that, which is such where there might be more people in the future that have alternative ways of working than full-time employment, right? And I think right now you're starting to see that in specific industries or specific types of professions, right? I don't necessarily think it's at large, because at the end of the day, it's really hard for someone who is a waiter or waitress to work from home, or to be able to do things freelance, right? But I think there's a reason why a lot of these talent platforms like Upwork and others are growing significantly during these past couple of years, because the demand and the interest from them on both sides of those marketplaces are growing in both ways. And so I think that is also, I think, something that the freelancing was a thing for sure before COVID and over the past few years, but I think it's definitely probably gone up a little bit as companies as well as freelancers become more comfortable with this idea behind it.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing up the idea of like how we evaluate work cultures, because when it comes down to it, that is what is shifting, and it's constantly shifting, right? There was a point in time where it was just like finances, like, that's we judge companies by how long they keep an employee and how much they pay them over time, right? Like the ability to move up, and then it turned into sort of a passion-based tech thing in the tech world. I'm evaluating the mission of the company, and maybe there's a little bit of a veneer being pulled away where people are like, they don't actually live any of these missions, Right. And so we're moving on from the passion to the flexibility evaluation. We're saying, how flexible is this company, and will they let me work in ways that I need to work that will work with me, right? I remember when my old manager, when I worked in advertising, had a baby, and just how difficult that was for her to manage, getting in trouble for leaving work exactly at 5 o'clock in order to go pick up her kids and things like that. And it's like, she wasn't really in trouble per se. It's not like she was going to be on a performance report in that way, but she just knew that it was like not being, that she was kind of getting dinged for it in different ways, like reputationally and things like that. And so, these are interesting things that happen, that then you start to see this shift in, okay, now people are focused more on flexibility. Does the company actually like allow me to live a life that I want to live? Or is it kind of like, a job that I used to have where, I commuted 2 hours each way, then I worked, then I tried to do some networking at night. And, that was everything. That was all the time I had. There was literally no other time. And so it is fun to watch these like, large scale changes happen, and these like kind of, sort of group thinks that pop up, and just kind of track where they're all going and see what, because the companies try to implement things, then the employees try to like push back, and then it's this constant negotiation that's happening over decades, and we're just sort of trying to, as coaches, put a finger on it at any given time and help people navigate that moment, right? What are some of the priorities that you think that you see people really highlighting in what they want out of a job? So they're in their job, they want to quit, and they want to get something better, right? You don't want to quit to go to the same thing. You don't want to quit to go to something worse. You want to quit to go to something better. What does that better look like in the people that you're talking to?
Sure. I mean, I think there's always going to be, it's again, like, it always kind of depends person to person, but I think the common things obviously are, look, no one wants to go to work and do a bad job, right? Like, no one signs up and says, you know what, I want to do poorly. We all want to work to be able to do a good job. And I think a big thing that drives really people is just having the space to be able to actually do good work. And I think what that comes, what you translate that into is certainly having a manager or a leader who empowers you to actually do your job and to do it well. Certainly there's an element of having good teammates or having other people work is a social thing, right? And that doesn't mean we're always talking with them, but yeah, like we want to work with people who are enjoyable to be around or to collaborate with. I think that there's certain elements of certainly of compensation and benefits that play into it, particularly if you are in a situation where either you're taking more, your role is expanding significantly because of the past 2 years, but you haven't been compensated in the same way. There certainly are some other things around benefits with that, right? In terms of making sure that the company has the types of benefits that you want. There certainly is a big thing around having some flexibility around the way in which you work, right? And I think that we are in a world right now where the even though we may have, generally speaking, roughly hours of 9 to 5, because of technology and because of the globalization of the world, we're kind of always on. And I think that there is a little bit of expectation now that employees can have the resources to kind of manage through that, right? And if they want to work maybe outside of the traditional bounds, that they have a manager who's willing to find ways to accommodate that, provided that they're being able to hit their metrics or their outcomes or whatever they're kind of measured on. And or if they're being able to do, if their job doesn't really require them to be in an office, if they can do it well, they have the ability and they're doing it well, they have the ability to have that kind of baked in as the baseline, not treated as like a benefit that only a certain amount of people kind of get. And so I think those are definitely the common things. And I look, like, I do think that there are people who they still want to believe that the company that they're working for, that what they stand for, roughly speaking, aligns with what they believe or some of their values. Or, I think there are always going to be people who really do want to identify deeply with the mission or the cause or for that particular segment that that company serves, like, et cetera. Like, I don't think that like went away, but I do think there's definitely a little bit more thought being paid, not just to those kinds of things, but also to, hey, like, I want to do a good job every day. What are the things that are going to enable me to do that? And I think, and then certainly finally, it's, diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces, right? I think particularly folks who don't feel like they have that now, that is something that they're really looking at intentionally when they're trying to go to a new place.
And I think that word is the key, the intentionality, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
I think for most of my career, the world has been sort of boxed out, right? Like, I remember the
Mm-hmm.
first time I tried to work remote, we had laptops, but we had so many different layers of security that it took like an hour and a
Sure.
half to like log
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was incredibly unproductive because it was hard to do. And
Mm-hmm.
my first job, I started with a desktop computer. There was no even dream of working remote at that time. Like, it took 3 years into that job before my first remote day. And now that's becoming standard, and non-traditional working hours are becoming standard. And, it's really much more of a negotiation than it is, just set in stone and accepting reality. And I think that, obviously it depends on the industry, but I think in general, one of the biggest shifts that I'm seeing is I wouldn't say things are even, because obviously there's so many people looking for jobs that companies have a little bit more of a leg up there,
Sure.
in a lot of ways. But I would say that this is probably one of the first times where flexibility and negotiation and trying to find something that works for both sides really is the core of the discussion. And I think that that's also forcing people to come to terms with other parts of their identity that maybe they've ignored because they had work. That, if I didn't really have a choice, I had to commute an hour and I had to be at work for these hours, and then I had to commute home. I never really had time to ask the question, well, what do I want to do with these extra hours? Do I want to watch Netflix? Right. Do I want to go learn a hobby? Do I want to do something else? So we're almost being forced. The pandemic has almost forced us to look at parts of ourselves that we were able to ignore due to the structures of the world previously. And now it sort of is like giving people, whether they want it or not, a bit more space to figure out who they are and what they need in life. And hopefully that turns out to be a good thing for most people.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on, as we wrap up here, What are your thoughts on someone who set a goal to quit their job for the new
Yep.
year? They haven't done it yet, and they're just sort of feeling like down in the dumps, like they haven't made the progress that they needed to make. What are maybe 2 or 3 things that they can do to just turn things around?
Sure. Well, I think I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck's work with growth mindset. And I think that one of the key words that they actually they use when they particularly want to teach young children around growth mindset is the word yet, right? So I haven't been able to do this yet. It doesn't mean you won't be able to do it forever, but it just means just right now in this moment, I haven't gotten there yet. And I think that is it's a small word, but I think it goes a long way. And if your goal was to quit your job, it's not that you haven't quit your job, you just haven't done it yet. And there's 11 more months in the year, so there's still plenty of time. And so I think the very first tactical thing is just to realign or just around expectations and just common language. And I think that will also maybe give you a more positive frame, a more growth oriented frame of, yeah, I'm not there yet, but that's okay. I think the second thing is really around getting clear about how do we link the intentions with the actions, right? And so if it truly is your intention to quit, what are the actions that you believe that you're going to take today that will eventually enable you to get towards that goal, right? In terms of whether you need to, if you feel like you want to have something lined up before you quit, what are the steps you're going to take to do that in terms of the networking that you're going to do, the jobs you're going to look at, the conversations that you're going to have, things like that. Or if you're going to quit and not have anything lined up, the things you need to do to kind of keep track of your finances or your personal life, the conversations you need to have with your spouse, your partner, the rest of your family, things like that. Anything you can do to start really getting clear around how you link the intention with the actions. And then finally, follow through on them, do them and keep track of them. And if you need to do what you do in terms of having that ideal day written down, being able to write down what are those actions that I'm going to take and keeping yourself honest. They've done some studies, and people who take notes when they write them out versus people who take notes on the computer, they're much more likely to follow through when people write them down versus when you just type them out on a computer. And anecdotally for myself, I know that I work the same way. And so if you want to do it really tactically, write down what the actions you're going to take that are going to align with your intentions to be able to hit or to get where you want to go. And I think over time, I think you'll increase your chances of getting there. But that's the advice that I would give.
I love it. Al, how can people find out more about your work and follow along with what you're building?
Thank you. It's been great chatting with you. So I'm the founder of Betterwork Labs, which is a talent development and career coaching consultancy. They can find me on my website at betterworklabs.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Just Al D is my name. Search me, reach out and send me a connection. I'd love to engage with you. And thank you. It's been great chatting with you, Martin.
Really it's been a blast. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights with the community. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat soon. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I really appreciate your support of what we're building here at Career Therapy as we continue to try and explore the hidden side of modern work and tell some of the stories that maybe don't get enough light shed on them. If you enjoyed what you listened to today, I hope you will leave us a review on iTunes. Subscribe to this wherever you're listening or watching on YouTube, Spotify, etc. And share this with some friends who you know are going through similar experiences and looking to build their career and gain some insights along the way. Again, thank you so much for stopping by, and I wish you the best. I'll see you on the next episode.